We've spoken so much about death of late. But there's one metric that gets scant focus. Our children are dying. More of them are dying than they are elsewhere. Babies here are more than twice as likely to die than in other parts of Europe. We lose more under fives than all but one other Western European country. The UK is the continent's second largest economy, yet many of our neighbours lose fewer of their older children. Now, the country's first ever national database of child deaths has been created. Our experts are trying to work out why so many children are dying, and it's becoming clear that there's one word that cannot be ignored. That word is deprivation. Professor Karen Loit, a neonatologist at Bristol University, led the analysis of the deaths of around 3,300 babies and children that occurred in 2019-2020.
We found that the relative risk of increased mortality was 10% for each increasing decile of deprivation, which was astonishing for us. That's a massive effect.
This graph shows the poorer the background of a child, the more likely they are to die. The correlation is unmistakable, and it's costing huge numbers of young lives.
23% of deaths are potentially avoidable, preventable, if we can eliminate social deprivation. And that translates to 700 additional deaths per year that could be avoided.
Trying to understand the factors that led to a child's death is one thing. Understanding how the policy decisions we make as a society may be contributing to so many of our children dying is another. And it is this that Newsnight is investigating. Our journey starts with cigarettes.
Hi.
This is Maddie. She's healthy and happy despite COVID among her peers currently forcing her to isolate for a third time this nursery term. But her mother Tierney had been smoking for years when she fell pregnant, starting at just 14. At the time, not far off a quarter of Rochdale's adult population smoked. Smoking is strongly linked to deprivation.
Everyone really was smoking. I come from an area where a lot of young people do smoke as well, so I had the likes of my friends in school, and if I'm honest, it wasn't discouraged not to smoke. The adults weren't, ooh, don't smoke. It was, go around the back of the bike shed sort of thing. All my family smoked. The only people that didn't smoke really is my sister. So that's it, yeah, just one out of us all that didn't smoke. So it was just pretty impossible not to.
Smoking in the household was identified as a factor in 226 child deaths studied. That's more than any other modifiable factor. Exposure to passive smoke is linked to low birth weights and premature delivery. And the impact of parental smoking can lead to other childhood illnesses that run throughout life. 4 years ago, the government set a target to get the number of women smoking when they give birth down to 6% by next year. But hitting that looks unlikely now. An analysis by anti-smoking charity ASH passed to Newsnight shows that in a number of areas, things had been going in the wrong direction altogether. Currently 9.5% of women in England are smoking when they give birth, far more than the 6% target. Pre-pandemic analysis shows that while 62 councils saw a fall in the numbers smoking when a baby was born compared to 4 years earlier, 73 saw little change and 16 saw an increase in the rate of smoking. New figures covering the pandemic do suggest fewer women smoking at birth, but how reliable these data are and whether they are anything more than a blip is unclear.
Whereas smoking rates generally have been going down, they've stagnated in the last few years in pregnancy. Around 1 in 10 women smoke now, just the same as 3 or 4 years ago. And the government's target was to reduce it to 6% or less by 2022, and we're nowhere near achieving that.
So what's going on? Newsnight visited Sheffield to investigate. With significant deprivation here, the number of mothers smoking when they give birth is nearly double the 6% target. But progress is being made. It's midwife Nicola Pearson's job to visit pregnant women who are smokers. She'll give everything to help them give up.
No pregnant woman wakes up in the morning and says, I want to smoke today. A woman doesn't wake up in the morning thinking, it's twice as likely my baby will die of a stillbirth if I carry on smoking today, and I'm going to do it anyway.
This machine can be a big help.
When we pop it on and a woman blows into it, her reading will show on here.
It monitors carbon monoxide levels in a woman's body.
In areas like this, we know that around 32 to 42% of the population are smoking, and that's huge. So if we can support, some of those women to help them stop smoking, the knock-on effects are massive.
But support is about so much more than mere encouragement. It can require a whole host of services to be functioning.
If you use an example of a pregnant woman, so she lives maybe here in Gleadless Valley, she's got housing issues, so we might consider a team around the family. Let's bring in her housing officer. Let's think about how she can access tobacco, thinking about cheap and illicit tobacco availability. So let's make sure trading standards are out there, kind of squashing down on that availability. Let's think about what peer support she's got and what support is around her. We're making sure that she's got the mental health support through services, through access to psychological services. We need to look at it from all these different angles.
Sheffield has not cut its funding of smoking cessation services. The council is trying to put in measures to prevent young people from taking up smoking in the first place, but pressure on public health budgets means tough choices.
Smoking is responsible for about 20% of deaths and about 15% of illness. We are probably not unique in Sheffield, but we spend 0.09% of the health budget on that thing that causes 20% of deaths and 15% of illness. We all want more public health interventions until it comes to the point of paying for it. To put more public health money into this means defunding something else, health visiting, drug and alcohol treatment, for instance, which are equally unpalatable choices.
So why are some local authorities faring better than others? The reasons are complex and include a mix of financial cuts, how services are delivered, and local social norms too.
The problem is that all local authorities have had their public health budgets cut, and that's affected the amount of money they can spend on smoking cessation and other public health issues. But it's how they use that money as much as anything else. And it's not just about saying to a pregnant woman, oh, if you smoke, you should think about quitting.
Public health experts have told Newsnight that people in poorer areas often have a deeper addiction and are more likely to be surrounded by others who smoke. This can mean a slower quit rate in those areas. And the brutal truth is, the worst does sometimes happen.
What would be really awful is for a woman to turn around and say, well, you never told me that could happen to my baby. I never had the chance to stop smoking. And that is, that's awful. So the fact that we're so honest and upfront with women about these risks is so important.
What's clear is that reducing the number of babies with a smoker in the home is about much more than urging personal responsibility. It's about how easy we as a society make it to give up, or even better, never to start at all. As things are, smoking is killing our children and playing its part in our high child mortality rates.
Deb Cohen with that report. In a statement, the Health Minister Jo Churchill told us it's absolutely critical we do everything we can to protect babies from the harms of smoking. And while smoking rates continue to decline, rates in pregnancy are worryingly high. We will publish a new tobacco control plan later this year, which will include further targeted proposals to reduce smoking rates in pregnancy, as they vary significantly across the country. I'm now joined by Professor Sir Michael Marmot, author of the seminal Government Commissioned report in 2010 into health inequalities. He followed up his research 10 years on, just before the pandemic struck. Welcome. I wanted to start by asking, what should our child death rate in this country be?
Well, the best in Europe is Finland, which has a rate of 1.9 per 1,000 live births, and ours is 3.9. That gives you a scale. Ours is more than twice as high. Now, put it in perspective, 3.9 is very low in historical context, but still, why shouldn't we have the same as the best of in Europe? And we don't.
And your reading of that in terms of what infant mortality tells us about how society is working and what we value, what do you make of that?
I think that infant mortality is telling us something more general about how we value the early years. So it is now at a very low level. But if we follow through childhood, we look pretty bad on a whole series of measures. So, for example, if we get up to age 15 and rank child well-being, out of 38 rich countries, we rank 27th. Not even average, well below the average. So the fact that our infant mortality or child mortality is 22 out of 23 countries, that's disadvantage that continues through the whole of childhood.
How have we got here then?
I'm sorry, how have we got there?
How have we got to this position?
Well, I think if we look more generally, and you mentioned the report that I did in February 2020, just before the pandemic, what we saw was, in general, the improvement in health had slowed down, if we look at life expectancy, and the slowdown had been more marked in the decade from 2010 in the UK than in any other rich country except the United States and Iceland. Inequalities had increased, and life expectancy for the poorest people outside London had gone down. That's where we were pre-pandemic. Now, if you agree with my assumption that health is telling us something fundamental about how well the society is meeting the needs of its members, then if health's not improving, society's not improving. If health inequalities are increasing, inequalities in society are increasing. And health for the poorest people is getting worse, and that will reflect on what happens in infancy, childbirth, infancy, and childhood.
So are you fearful, perhaps more than you were, because of the pandemic now, in terms of the direction?
The pandemic exposed and amplified the underlying inequalities in society. In the report we did last week, Build Back Fairer in Greater Manchester, we said, and forgive this cliche, I said the fall in life expectancy was jaw-dropping. For women in Greater Manchester, in the year 2020, life expectancy fell by 1.2 years, and for men, 1.6 years. And that is jaw-dropping. That's enormous. 1 year may not sound like a lot, but that's enormous for 1 year. It fell in the country as a whole, but greater in more deprived regions of the country.
And
now,
yet,
that's terrible.
Yes, well, I was just about to say, and yet the narrative from this government is often about levelling up. Do you have faith in this government to do that, to right those wrongs as you describe?
The way I would put it is, if they are serious, and that's a big conditional, if they are serious about levelling up, the reports that we've done on Build Back Fairer for the country, and more recently for Greater Manchester, give them a blueprint of what they need to do. There's a great deal that can be done locally, but it does need government funding. And what we saw over the decade leading up to the pandemic is sharply regressive cuts to funding of local government. The most deprived 20% of areas had a 32% cut in spending per person in the decade from 2010. Now, how can you provide services to people in need facing those sorts of cuts? And the government said austerity is over. Great. But that doesn't mean just no more cuts. It means restore the cuts that you've made. So I would say it's not whether I have faith in them, it's if you're serious, this is what you have to do.
Sir Michael Marmot, thank you.